Warning: this episode contains serious topics that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listeners' discretion advised.
The Wrestling Vault.
Hello and welcome to the Wrestling Vault podcast. I'm your host Lee Christie, and here we discuss the past, the present and the future of professional wrestling. Histories, careers, it's all here. Today we talk about the evolution of women's professional wrestling. We will be discussing the likes of its beginnings, its controversial past, its misogyny and topics of over-sexualization, and how the women's roster evolved with the NXT takeover and the four horsewomen combined of Sasha Banks, Charlotte Flair, Bayley and Becky Lynch. Part 1. The Past. Regarding the transitions of women's wrestling from as early as the 1950s, women's wrestling would only become popular in the 80s, when the genre of rock and roll with professional wrestling would skyrocket. Celebrity influences in wrestling have never been shy of each other, but the recognition of women's wrestling wouldn't take off without it. One of the most recognisable wrestlers from this time is the Fabulous Moolah, Wendi Richter, Miss Elizabeth and Mae Young. The Fabulous Moolah was the face of women's wrestling at the time, holding the women's professional wrestling title for a recognised 28 years with NWA, but never recognised as a controversial figure from out the ring. She has had alleged sexual assault exploitations of her own women's wrestling training schools and attendees, all of which have been addressed in the Dark Side of the Ring episode of The Fabulous Moolah, as titled by her in-ring name. From then on, in the 80s, Wendi Richter, gaining attraction with the celebrity influence of Cyndi Lauper. In the summer of 1984, she became the star figure after ending Moolah's 28-year reign. Controversially to add, Moolah's reign had ended several times before this in 1984, ending in the 50s and 70s, but was never recognised by the WWF, now WWE. As shown in the Dark Side of the Ring episode, the acclaimed first original Screwjob took place in 1985. Moolah had dressed as a different persona as the Spider against Wendi, in which the referee counted a swift 3 count, regaining Moolah's title. Wendi Richter to this day claims truthfully she had no idea that Moolah was the Spider character and thus invoked a real fight after the match. Wendi would leave and the women's roster would be entrapped by Moolah's possession. The Fabulous Moolah would not drop the belt recognisably by the WWE until the sensational Sherri debuted, ending her reign in 1987. In standards, retconning Wendi's win. Sherri would be an icon of the business, including the likes of Miss Elizabeth, who we mentioned earlier, having the infamous relationship with Macho Man Randy Savage. Women's wrestling did not evolve and more devolved into more sexual, diva content within the late 90s to the 2000s, which then brings me on to Part 2, Divas. Under Vince McMahon's playground of WWE, within the Attitude and Ruthless Aggression era, several sexual assault, rape allegations and overall treatment of women at the time would be severely overlooked. As horrible as it sounds, employees at the time had mountains of allegations. With himself, at the time of 1985 to 1986, female referee had accused McMahon of rape. All of this would go unnoticed, shamefully never delivering the justice these women deserve. Another infamous incident would be the Superfly Jimmy Snuka and the murder of his girlfriend, in which he claims was not involved despite multiple reasons to be. In 2016, the case would arise again but would never transpire after Snuka had issues with dementia and couldn't stand fit for court. 30 years on, nothing has ever been solved, like many of the McMahon involvements and allegations brought on the business against women had seemingly gone to an NDA of sort. In the 90s and 2000s, women's wrestling was a carnival, a sexual attraction, almost pornography at that rate. Despite the outstanding talent of Lita and Trish Stratus, the company resorted to booking, and I quote, bra and panty matches where it lead to the female participant stripping bare. A disgust and black eye to professional wrestling business. In the Netflix docu-series of McMahon, an alleged storyline was proposed by Vince to be the father of his own daughter's baby. This was without question the time of women's wrestling where the females were named divas. While the name would loosely change within the 2010, it was seemingly referred to the women's wrestlers at the time when there was no roster. One belt, while the men's division had multiple belts. The misogyny was heavily recognised by how the women were treated, the likes of Chyna being presented as a dominant wrestler, only to be fired and work in the porn industry. Discriminatory towards the female wrestlers, the 2010s through to now would seemingly begin to take steps away from this era. Part 3. Slow Beginnings. In 2008, the WWE would continue its product under stricter and family-friendly guidelines to market to healthier sponsorship and better storytelling. Did it work? That's a debate for a whole other episode. Creativity, match coordination, and character development were limited, and most importantly, it still seemed the men's division was grabbing more of the attention than the females, still referred to as divas. In the mid-2010s, it would begin a shift, presenting a Divas Championship and beginning to build the women's roster. Mae Young and Wendy Richter would be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame and begin to clean up their image. Total Divas was a reality television show that ran on air by the WWE and the network E, presenting men and women's wrestlers on a more casual American presentation. FCW, Florida Championship Wrestling, would rebrand as NXT, the third brand of WWE, becoming a developmental for the new wrestlers and inexperienced. The likes of AJ Lee, Paige, and Summer Rae would begin the slow transformation of women's wrestling. Summer Rae being the first women's NXT call-up to the main roster and an NFL style of draft pick. AJ Lee would then go on to defend her title against all the Divas at WrestleMania 30, becoming the first time the title was defended at the Grand Affair. AJ Lee is still the longest Divas champion despite not being in the company anymore. Paige would iconically dethrone AJ Lee on an episode of Monday Night Raw, becoming the youngest female wrestler to do so. The fans would slowly begin to pick up on the women's professional wrestling evolution. A Bella Twins match would last 30 seconds, which began in the hashtag Give Divas a Chance. Part 4. NXT. The Four Horsewomen faction would begin a revolution in the women's professional wrestling business. Charlotte Flair, daughter of the infamous Ric Flair, would begin the faction with the inclusion of Sasha Banks, Becky Lynch, and Bayley. Each has synonymously had some of the greatest women's wrestling matches of all time. My favourite, and the majority of all, is the Sasha Banks vs Bayley match at NXT TakeOver New York. Some still claim that the NXT brand is still the best show where the presentation of both female and male competitors are shown, and it's hard to disagree. Majority of all the talent gets screen time and the equal matches that they deserve. But it wouldn't be without the Four Horsewomen to begin with. The Four Horsewomen would debut on the main roster, breaking up and each having their own individual single careers. The likes of Asuka, Io Sky, and the Japanese women's wrestling division would then jump ship because of its treatment. The fans were all in on the product. In 2018, the first ever all-women's wrestling event would take place called Evolution, having the likes of the Mae Young Classic tournament, the likes of Ronda Rousey and the MMA women's going to WWE for the equal treatment of their presentation. Women's wrestling in the early decades was a shadow of its present self, that the 2010s through to the present day of women's wrestling has never been on a much grander scale. Part 5. The present. WWE and the professional wrestling business has now presented the women's roster in a new respectful light, introducing the likes of the women's WWE Heavyweight, Universal, Intercontinental and the US Championship are now all present in the modern product. The only controversy is the prioritization of storylines and presentation. The new WWE product in 2025 has fully exited the PG guidelines after its move to Netflix and giving the women and men present themselves however they like. Rhea Ripley, one of the greatest stars to debut in the WWE, has become a multiple-time champion on the women's roster, presenting herself as a gothic, violent character. As it stands, Charlotte Flair has come under scrutiny. While being a 14-time women's champion, has been the centre of controversy, including the likes of Becky Lynch recently. While their contributions are not to be taken away, Flair has been villainised for not giving other women's wrestlers and competitors the screen time or the attention. With the inclusion of the current WWE Women's Champion Tiffany Stratton, it seemed that Flair had went off script in their match and practically stole the limelight instead of aiding her other peer. With that being said, I will conclude this with the popularity of Io Sky, a self-made women's wrestler who got over with the audience herself and had a feud involving Bianca Belair and Rhea Ripley at Mania 41. While the storyline, including the men, had came under the controversy of being stale and repetitive, some alleging the European crowds booing Bianca for being a person of colour. While I wish not to defend, but I can only have my opinion of this from a neutral standpoint as a fan of wrestling and a fan of WWE and as a male, that women's wrestling has never been as popular as it is today. The women's wrestling scene in both WWE, AEW and in the indies have had gratitude and applauded the women's roster. I believe the only scrutiny comes from the storylines and the presentation. WrestleMania 41 was a shy product of its previous chapter of 40, and the internet wrestling community has seemingly not given the storylines a chance to unfold. But in pro of this, they are also right, that the storylines and the product can become quite uncreative, which is the issue taking against the creatives and not the wrestlers themselves. This was analysing the women's roster evolution of professional wrestling. My name is Lee Christie, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of
The Wrestling Vault.